Hello friends, seeking the roots of civilization and explorers of the past. Today, we enter the revolutionary world of the Neolithic age, when humanity abandoned nomadic life and settled on the land. We witness the birth of property and settled order through the domestication of the first wheat grain and the lives that took shape within the mud brick. Walls of the first permanent dwellings. What resonates with you most when you think about that era? I always enjoy reading your comments. Imagine a world without cities, without walls, without the endless hum of human activity. Picture instead vast open landscapes stretching under a sky so wide it feels infinite, where small bands of humans wander, guided only by the seasons, the movements of animals, and the quiet pulse of the earth beneath their feet. This was the world before the Neolithic age, a time when humanity existed at the mercy of nature, hunting, foraging, and drifting from one resource to the next. But around 10,000 BCE, something began to stir a quiet revolution. Subtle at first, almost imperceptible, yet destined to change the course of human history forever. Early humans began to experiment with planting seeds, with taming the wild grasses that once fed them, and with capturing the animals that roamed alongside them. It was not an abrupt shift, but a gradual unfolding, a slow and patient reimagining of what it meant to live, to survive, and eventually to thrive. Imagine the first farmer kneeling in a soft, rich soil, planting tiny grains of wheat or barley, not knowing if they would grow, yet daring to hope. Imagine the domestication of sheep and goats, creatures that once ran wild, now slowly becoming companions, sources of milk, wool, and future sustenance. These first steps into agriculture were fragile, precarious. Yet they opened possibilities that no one could have imagined: permanent settlements, food surpluses, and the slow accumulation of knowledge and skill that would lay the foundation for everything that followed. From these modest beginnings, humans learned to shape their environment, to redirect water, to clear land, and to build structures that would stand longer than a single lifetime. Some researchers suggest that this transition sparked profound changes in social structures, creating new forms of cooperation, and eventually inequality, as some families controlled more resources than others. Others believe it was the rhythms of the earth itself, the push and pull of seasons and climate that guided these early experiments. Sit back, relax, and let your mind drift to the earliest villages where smoke rose gently from clay hearths. Children ran barefoot across soft fields, and the future of human civilization was quietly taking root. And yet, as these small communities began to settle, questions arose that would follow humanity for millennia. How much could one group control the land? How would they manage water, crops, and animals? And what unseen forces would shape the first steps toward permanent society? Next, we move to the first innovations in tools and settlement that began turning these humble villages into the early engines of civilization. As these early communities planted the seeds of civilization, their lives became intertwined with the tools and technologies they crafted. Simple at first, yet revolutionary in their quiet persistence. Imagine hands worn and calloused, shaping stone into blades, chisels, and scrapers. Each tool a lifeline for survival. Each strike of flint against flint, echoing through the still air like the heartbeat of progress itself. These implements were more than mere objects. They were extensions of human will, enabling the clearing of forests, the carving of wood, and the processing of grains that would sustain entire families. Some researchers suggest that the refinement of these tools marked the beginning of human mastery over the natural world, while others emphasize the collective knowledge required to produce them, hinting at the earliest forms of apprenticeship and shared skill. Alongside these practical innovations, early Neolithic people began to construct permanent shelters. Their dwellings simple yet sturdy, often built from mud, timber, and stone, with roofs thatched to keep out the winter chill. Imagine walking through one of these early villages, the scent of smoke mingling with earth, the murmur of conversation, and the lowing of tethered animals, as families huddled together in the quiet evenings, sharing stories and planning for the seasons ahead. Pottery also emerged during this period, delicate yet utilitarian, used to store grains, water, and the first fermented foods. Spiral patterns, geometric shapes, and intricate designs began to appear on these vessels, signaling not only artistic expression, but also symbolic communication, a way to convey identity, belief, or status across generations. Some of the earliest burial mounds and cemeteries revealed that communities were already thinking about life, death, and the invisible bonds that connected them, as graves were adorned with tools, ornaments, and sometimes the bones of cherished animals, suggesting a deepening spiritual consciousness. From one village to the next, patterns of trade and cultural exchange began to emerge, even in these small, scattered settlements, as flint shells and rare stones traveled across rivers, plains, and forests, connecting distant communities in subtle networks of interaction. It was through these networks that ideas, techniques, and traditions spread, creating the mosaic of Neolithic culture that stretched across continents. And yet, as human ingenuity flourished, so too did the challenges of living in a settled world. Disease, resource competition, and environmental pressures tested these early societies in ways their wandering ancestors had not faced. Every innovation carried a consequence, and every solution posed a new question. Next, we move into the emergence of large-scale agriculture and the revolutionary, techniques that would transform not just survival, but the very structure of human society, setting the stage for the monumental changes of the Neolithic Age. As the Neolithic Age unfolded, humanity began to step onto a new stage, one defined not by wandering in search of food, but by the deliberate shaping of the land itself. Sit back, relax, and picture fields stretching across gentle hills, the scent of freshly turned soil rising with the morning mist, and the rhythmic sounds of hoes and digging sticks breaking the earth. In these early agricultural landscapes, communities experimented with cereals like wheat and barley, legumes and tubers, learning which soils, rainfall patterns, and seasonal cycles could coax the best yields. Some researchers suggest that these first attempts at large-scale cultivation were haphazard at first, trial and error guiding the selection of seeds, while others propose that careful observation and shared communal knowledge allowed certain villages to dominate the surrounding environment. As populations grew, the need for organized labor became unavoidable. Terraces carved into hillsides, irrigation channels dug through arid plains, and embankments along rivers are all testaments to the ingenuity and coordination of Neolithic peoples. Imagine the Ubaid canals in Mesopotamia, water flowing through carefully graded channels, wooden gates controlling its course, entire communities working in unison to ensure crops flourished. This was not merely farming, it was engineering on a scale that would have seemed miraculous to their ancestors. In parallel, the domestication of animals transformed daily life. Cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs were no longer wild sources of unpredictable food, but partners in production. Milk, wool, and labor created entirely new economic possibilities. Specialized pottery for cheese-making, stone storage rooms with controlled climates, and weaving tools for wool indicate communities. We're developing technologies to extend the utility of these animals far beyond meat. The implications went deeper than survival. They reshaped social structures. Families and clans became interdependent in ways previously unimaginable, creating hierarchies, division of labor, and emerging leadership roles. Trade networks spread these innovations even further, carrying flint, obsidian, shells, and early metals across vast distances, connecting villages into intricate webs of exchange. Some believe this interconnectedness laid the groundwork for complex social identities, while others see it as the beginning of cultural competition and prestige economies. Yet, as the land yielded more food and communities grew, pressures emerged. Population density strained resources. Disputes over water and land arose, and the balance between cooperation and conflict became a daily negotiation. Every plowed field and domesticated herd carried both promise and peril. And as we trace the quiet revolution of agriculture, we move inevitably toward the next transformation, the harnessing of animal power, the rise of wheeled transport, and the technologies that would not only change how people worked, but also how they moved, traded, and imagined the very world around them. Next, we move to the remarkable era when humans began to bend not only the earth, but also the very creatures that shared it with them to their will. Picture vast steppes, morning mist hovering over grazing herds, the soft snorts of cattle, and the rhythmic thump of hooves against soil newly turned for planting. Around 4000 BC, the Pontic-Caspian steppes witnessed the emergence of what we now call the Kirin culture, a society defined by pastoral wealth and technological sophistication. Burial mounds, sometimes called chines, rose from the landscape like silent monuments, containing the remains of horses, wheeled vehicles, an elaborate metalwork that whispered of a people who had mastered mobility and status simultaneously. Some researchers believe these graves were not merely resting places for the dead, but statements of power, of social hierarchy, and of identity, an early sign that humans were beginning to understand the symbolic power of objects and animals. Horse domestication transformed life on the steppes, creating both literal and metaphorical speed, allowing communities to expand their reach, trade with distant neighbors, and respond to environmental pressures with unprecedented agility. Alongside this, the invention of wheeled vehicles changed everything. Imagine the meticulous woodworking required to fashion wheels and axles that could bear heavy loads across uneven terrain, the careful balancing of weight, the leather and rope harnesses designed to direct the strength of draft animals with precision. From Poland to the northern Caucasus, archaeological evidence of 4W wheeled wagons illustrates not just technical skill, but the spread of knowledge across vast distances, a silent testament to trade networks and cultural exchange. Meanwhile, pastoral life created opportunities for what scholars call the secondary products revolution, the systematic use of animals for milk, wool, and labor rather than mere meat, specialized pottery for spindles and weaving implements all point to societies reshaping their economies and daily routines around renewable resources. These innovations had profound social implications. Communities became interdependent in new ways. Hierarchies grew more complex, and the emergence of craft specialists, metal workers, textile producers, and animal handlers created social differentiation that would ripple across generations. Yet, with mobility and wealth came new pressures: competition for grazing lands, disputes over water access, and the constant need to manage increasingly complex technologies. As these early steppe societies perfected animal traction and wheeled transport, they set the stage for the next great leap in human history: the intensification of agriculture, the colonization of distant lands, and the creation of the first expansive trade networks that would connect communities across Europe, Asia, and beyond. What mysteries lay hidden in those early wagons? And how did the harnessing of animals reshape not just survival, but ambition itself? From the windswept steppes, we turn now to the lands where water became both a lifeline and a challenge, where human ingenuity transformed rivers into the veins of civilization itself. Imagine the vast alluvial plains of Mesopotamia, the Tigris and Euphrates stretching as far as the eye can see, their waters shimmering under a relentless sun, yet their floods unpredictable, their arid stretches threatening famine. Around 4000 BC, communities such as those of the Ubaid culture began constructing elaborate canal networks, diverting water with astonishing precision to cultivate fields that would otherwise have remained barren. Archaeological evidence from sites like Telsawan reveals channels, carefully engineered to maintain flow while preventing erosion with gradients, so precise that water moved gently yet powerfully across the landscape. These were not solitary projects. They demanded unprecedented levels of cooperation, organization, and technical knowledge. Entire communities were mobilized, labor coordinated across seasons, overseers directing teams of workers with an understanding of hydraulic principles that seems almost modern in its sophistication. Some researchers suggest that these early irrigation systems were the crucibles in which the first forms of bureaucratic administration were born, with clay tablets recording water allocations, maintenance schedules, and field use. Quiet testament to humans beginning to manage not just land, but society itself. Meanwhile, in the highlands of India and Peru, another form of agricultural mastery was taking shape. Terrace fields carved into steep slopes with stone retaining walls, drainage channels, and even microclimatic modifications like heat-retaining stones transformed mountainides into productive farmland. The Merahama terraces of Peru extend across entire valleys, requiring collective labor, engineering skill, and a nuanced understanding of soil mechanics and water management. The same ingenuity applied to secondary animal products as humans learned to harvest milk, wool, and labor from domestic animals, transforming subsistence into surplus and necessity into specialization. Pottery designed for cheese making, lipid residues indicating dairy use, and tools for wool processing all reveal a systematic approach to extracting more from the same resources. These innovations created interdependent societies where wealth, knowledge, and labor had to be managed collectively, and where technological mastery began to shape social hierarchies in subtle but enduring ways with water, animals, and engineered landscapes. Humans were no longer merely surviving. They were reshaping environments, economies, and societies, laying the foundations for trade, political authority, and monumental architecture. Yet, in the shadow of these achievements, questions linger. How did early communities decide who controlled the water, who reaped the surplus, and who held the knowledge that could alter landscapes and destinies alike? The answers remain tantalizingly hidden, whispering across the ages. Next, we move from rivers and terraces to the subtle but transformative revolution of animal power. a quiet force that would reshape agriculture, transportation, and human society in ways that were almost imperceptible at first, yet would echo for millennia. Imagine the vast open steppes of Eurasia, where the wind sweeps across golden grasses and herds of cattle and sheep graze under an endless sky, their strength and endurance becoming intertwined with human ambition. Around 3500 BC, communities began domesticating animals not just for food, but for labor cattle selected for size and temperament to pull plows, oxen yoked to transport systems that could move heavier loads than any human alone could manage. Archaeological evidence from burial mounds and settlement sites reveals the marks of early plow use. Furrow patterns preserved in soil as a silent testimony to the integration of draft animals into farming practices. This was not merely an economic change, but a profound social one. Communities had to coordinate care, breeding, and labor, creating interdependent relationships between humans and animals, where survival and productivity depended on understanding behavior, health, and strength. Alongside plowing, the development of wheeled vehicles transformed mobility, trade, and warfare. The Pontic-Caspian steppes provide some of the earliest evidence, with burial sites containing 4W wheeled wagons, their axles and wheels carefully engineered to carry both people and goods across rough terrain. The Bronys pot from Poland, depicting a covered wagon, suggests that these innovations were not experimental, but practical, standardized technologies already embedded in daily life. Researchers believe that the rapid adoption and spread of wheeled transport through trade networks accelerated cultural exchange, allowing ideas, goods, and even populations to move faster than ever before. At the same time, pastoralists were mastering the secondary products revolution, exploiting milk, wool, and other animal derivatives to expand both diet and economy. Specialized tools for cheese making, spindles for weaving, and evidence of selective breeding indicates systematic approaches to resource management, transforming ordinary livestock into engines of surplus and specialization. These developments quietly laid the groundwork for social hierarchies. Those who controlled animals, vehicles, and knowledge held new forms of power, while communities that coordinated labor efficiently could cultivate more land and support larger populations. As humans harnessed strength beyond their own bodies, the stage was set for monumental changes in settlement patterns, trade networks, and the very relationship between people and the land. And yet, with every innovation, new questions arise. Who decided how labor and resources were allocated? Who determined the rules of ownership, mobility, and control? These are questions that remain buried in the soil, echoing faintly through the wheels, harnesses, and plow marks of the distant past, inviting us to ponder the mysteries of early human ingenuity. From the quiet revolution of animal power, we move to the subtle genius of irrigation and water management, a feat of engineering that transformed landscapes, economies, and human ambition itself. Picture the vast alluvial plains of Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates carve their slow, sinuous paths through sun-baked soil, their seasonal floods both a blessing and a threat. Around 4000 BC, communities like the Ubaid began taming these rivers with meticulously engineered canals, levees, and distribute networks that carried precious water across hundreds of kilom, turning barren lands into fertile oases, capable of sustaining dense populations. At sites such as Tel Sawan in Iraq, evidence of carefully graded channels demonstrates an understanding of hydraulic principles far beyond what one might expect for the time. Gradients were designed to maintain steady flow, prevent erosion, and clears throat ensure that silt did not choke the lifeblood of crops. Imagine the labor-involved teams of workers coordinating the excavation of canals, the construction of wooden gates, and the reinforcement of banks, all under the guidance of leaders who had to calculate not only water distribution but social cooperation. These early hydraulic systems did more than nourish crops. They reshaped society itself, creating interdependent networks of villages and settlements that relied on shared maintenance and cooperation, while inevitably sowing the seeds of conflict over water rights and priorities. Clay tablets suggest that bureaucratic oversight emerged alongside these networks, with records of allocations and schedules hinting at the first inklings of organized administration, a precursor to the complex state systems that would dominate later civilizations. And this ingenuity was not confined to Mesopotamia. Across the globe, communities in mountainous regions were developing terrace agriculture, carving stone platforms into steep slopes in the Indian highlands and the Andean valleys of Peru. These terraces were more than simple plots of land. They were carefully engineered ecosystems designed to prevent soil erosion, manage water runoff, and even manipulate microclimates through stone heat collectors that extended growing seasons at dizzying altitudes. The technical knowledge required soil mechanics, drainage systems, and structural stability speaks to a sophistication that rivals the great monuments of the era. With irrigation, terraces, and water control, humans began to assert dominion over environments once thought marginal or inhospitable, harnessing natural forces to secure sustenance, expand territories, and lay the foundations for the monumental civilizations that would soon rise. And yet, as we trace these channels and terraces across continents, we are left to wonder who were the minds behind these feats, and what visions guided their hands. How did early societies conceive of control over water? And what subtle tensions and collaborations emerged from this unprecedented manipulation of nature? The answers are buried, flowing silently beneath the surface, waiting for us to decipher the secrets they carry. As the waters were tamed and fields expanded, another quiet revolution was unfolding alongside them. The secondary products revolution, a transformation of human-animal relationships that would ripple across the Neolithic world. Imagine herds of cattle, sheep, and goats grazing across sunlit plains, no longer merely sources of meat, but living reserves of milk, wool, and labor. Some researchers suggest that the systematic exploitation of these secondary products began as simple curiosity, humans noticing that milking a cow or sheep produced a nourishing liquid, or that certain sheep produced longer, softer fibers. But soon this curiosity blossomed into a deliberate, transformative practice. Archaeological evidence reveals specialized pottery with perforated bottoms used for lipid residue analysis, indicating stored milk fats, and stone storage chambers with controlled humidity for aging dairy, suggesting that Neolithic communities had mastered the biochemical processes necessary for preserving these perishable resources. Wool production, too, was revolutionized, with selective breeding producing sheep with continuous wool growth, requiring annual shearing and creating a symbiotic relationship between humans and animals. Tools for processing woolcomb spindles, weaving equipment appear in sites like Kettle, Yuck, showing that textile production had become a structured craft integrated into everyday life. Beyond sustenance and clothing, the domestication of draft animals reshaped landscapes, enabling plow agriculture that extended fields into soils previously too heavy or compact for human labor alone. Archaeologists identify furrows and soil impressions that speak to systematic cultivation using animal traction, an innovation that allowed communities to feed larger populations and expand into new territories. The emergence of wheeled vehicles in the Pontic-Caspian steppe around 3500 BC added another layer of sophistication, transporting goods, people, and harvests across vast distances with 4W wheeled wagons, carefully constructed using advanced woodworking and load distribution principles. Sites like the Broni's Pot in Poland depict covered wagons hinting at early logistics, trade, and the movement of both material and ideas. Together, these innovations reveal a subtle orchestration of resources, knowledge, and labor. Humans manipulating animals not just for immediate gain, but for sustained productivity, social complexity, and the gradual accumulation of wealth and influence. And yet in the quiet fields, the lowing of cattle, the shear of wool, the rhythmic beat of wheels on soft earth, one is compelled to ask, how did these early relationships with animals shape not only diets and economies, but the very social structures and cultural imaginations of Neolithic peoples? Could the gentle hum of a herd or the rotation of a plough have whispered the first lessons in organization, hierarchy, and cooperation that would define human civilization for millennia? The answers linger wrapped in the furrows and folds of the earth. As animal labor and products reshaped human economies, attention turned to the land itself. As communities across the globe began to experiment with irrigation, terraces, and other strategies that allowed them to bend landscapes to their will, transforming marginal or previously unusable environments into productive agricultural zones. Picture the arid plains of Mesopotamia, where the Ubaid culture carved networks of canals from the Tigris and Euphrates, channeling water across vast sun-baked alluvial lands to create artificial oases capable of sustaining dense populations. At sites like Tel Sawan in Iraq, archaeologists have uncovered carefully engineered irrigation channels dating to around 4000 BC with precise gradients designed to maintain steady water flow while preventing the destructive an erosion that could collapse entire systems. These early waterworks required not only technical knowledge of hydraulic principles, but a level of social coordination that seems astonishing for the period. Communities organized labor to dig, maintain, and operate these networks, often spanning dozens of kilometers, while clay tablets hint at bureaucratic oversight records of water allocation, and maintenance schedules that hint at the earliest forms of administrative control. Meanwhile, in the highlands of India and the Andes, people were sculpting terraces into steep slopes, building stone-walled platforms that prevented erosion, maximized arable land, and even manipulated microclimates to extend growing seasons. At Mihama in Peru, terraces stretch across entire valleys, reflecting collective labor on a scale comparable to the megalithic monuments of Europe, and demonstrating a sophisticated understanding of soil, mechanics, drainage, and environmental adaptation. These innovations were not just about survival, they were about control, mastery over an environment that demanded respect and ingenuity. Across multiple continents, these practices marked the beginnings of intensive agriculture, where the landscape itself became an extension of human labor and imagination. And yet, as fields expanded and terraces climbed mountainsides, questions linger in the soil. Did the immense coordination required for these systems plant the earliest seeds of social hierarchy? Or were communities bound together by necessity alone? Did the whisper of flowing water through canals and terraces guide early leaders toward organization, authority, and the management of complex societies. These questions remain hidden beneath the fertile earth as the foundations of civilization slowly took root in stone, soil and water, shaping futures that the earliest farmers could scarcely have imagined. As communities mastered the land, another quiet revolution was unfolding with their herds. As the secondary products revolution transformed domestic animals from mere sources of meat into renewable assets that would reshape economies, diets, and social structures. Imagine a Neolithic village in Europe where sheep, goats, and cattle were carefully tended not only for their flesh, but for milk, wool, and labor, creating interdependent relationships that altered the very biology of these species over generations. Archaeological evidence like perforated pottery vessels, used for early chism and lipid residue analysis revealing milk fats, paints a picture of communities learning to extend the life and the utility of animal products through sophisticated processing techniques. Milk was fermented into cheese, stored in specially designed chambers with controlled humidity and temperature, while wool production underwent its own intensification. As humans selectively bred sheep for continuous wool growth, necessitating annual shearing and creating a cycle of dependence that reshaped both human and animal life cycles. Tools like combs, spindles, and early weaving equipment found at sites such as cattle yoke revealed that wool processing had become integrated into larger textile manufacturing systems, hinting at early craft specialization and trade networks that would link villages across distances. Beyond wool and milk, the exploitation of animal traction revolutionized agriculture, with cattle and oxen harnessed to plows, reducing the labor of field preparation and allowing cultivation of larger, heavier soils that had been previously impossible to farm with human muscle alone. Archaeological traces of plow marks beneath burial mounds suggest communities systematically experimented with draft animals, carefully selecting for temperament, strength, and durability. While the introduction of wheeled vehicles around 3500 BC in the Pontic Caspian steppe opened the first corridors of rapid overland transport, connecting settlements and enabling trade in goods to heavy or bulky for earlier human-only systems. The Bronick pot from Poland depicting a 4W wheeled wagon hints at a sophisticated understanding of axle design, load distribution, and wheel mechanics, suggesting these were not crude experiments, but fully realized technologies capable of reshaping economies. Yet, as milk was churned, wool was spun, and carts creaked along dirt paths, the social implications quietly shifted. Hierarchies emerged. Elites gained control over herds and transport, and craft specialists accrued prestige and influence. These early innovations laid the groundwork for the complex interdependence of labor, resources, and social organization that would define Bronze Age societies, leaving us to wonder how much of our own reliance on animals and technology traces back to these humble, transformative experiments with draft animals, harnessed and wheeled vehicles rolling across the steppe. The Neolithic world entered a new era of agricultural productivity and territorial expansion, where population pressures and environmental opportunity intersected to drive unprecedented social complexity across Europe and Asia. Settlements swelled with density and size, increasing dramatically as intensified farming allowed more people to be fed on the same land. In Ukraine and Romania, the Cucutini culture built enormous villages like Tiana, sprawling over 400 hectares and housing upwards of 15,000 individuals. a scale that would have dwarfed earlier communities and required remarkable organizational foresight. Imagine concentric circles of tightly packed houses, streets, or pathways winding between them. Central plazas where trade, ceremony, or governance took place, and specialized districts for craft production, storage, and defense, all orchestrated to maintain harmony in these booming settlements, coordinating thousands of people to construct homes, manage water, cultivate fields, and oversee communal tasks demanded hierarchies and labor systems that were previously unnecessary in smaller bands. From one mystery to the next, we see the evidence of human ingenuity pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Colonization of new lands from islands like Cyprus to high-altitude valleys in the Andes required not only the physical transport of people and animals, but the movement of entire agricultural packages, including seeds, livestock, and tools, essentially creating miniature artificial ecosystems wherever these pioneers settled. The early farmers of Kyrgyzstan, for instance, brought goats, sheep, pigs, and wheat across the Mediterranean waters, shaping both human life and the environment in ways that would endure for millennia. In the Andes, terrace farming at sites like Mahama illustrates a mastery of stone masonry, soil management and hydrology, where microclimatic manipulation, stone walls, absorbing heat channels, directing runoff. Careful crop selection allowed cultivation in cold, thin air conditions above 4,000 meters, a feat that seems almost impossible without generations of observation and experimentation. These territorial expansions were not merely agricultural, they were technological and social experiments on a continental scale. Communities adapted tools, techniques, and organizational methods to environments as diverse as rocky Mediterranean islands, river floodplains in Mesopotamia, and mountainous highlands in South America, each requiring new strategies, new skills, and new forms of cooperation. The remarkable coordination implied by these early settlements, combined with innovations in animal husbandry, irrigation, and crop cultivation, hints at social and technological networks connecting people across vast distances. Networks that, in some cases, may have exchanged knowledge as readily as goods. And yet, even as the Neolithic world expanded and transformed, one question lingers. How did these scattered pockets of ingenuity converge to lay the groundwork for the monumental societies of the Bronze Age, where metallurgy, trade, and warfare would dominate the landscape in ways the earliest farmers could scarcely imagine? As we trace the Neolithic journey from small villages to sprawling settlements, the next revelation emerges in the realm of innovation. The rise of metallurgy, first with copper and later with bronze, which would forever change the rhythm of human life and the texture of civilization. In the quiet hum of a workshop long ago, you can almost hear the crackle of furnaces and the metallic scent of smelted ores filling the air, as artisans discovered that heating copper-bearing stones could yield malleable metal, soft at first, yet brimming with potential. Sites across Anatolia, Serbia, and the Balkans reveal the meticulous skill required. Stone-lined furnaces, bellows to intensify the flames, and crucibles to contain molten metal, all demanding precise timing and knowledge that could only come from repeated experimentation and careful observation. Some researchers suggest that these early metallurgists worked in secrecy, their techniques guarded like sacred knowledge, while others believe they may have shared their discoveries along emerging trade routes, fostering a silent revolution across continents. The appearance of copper axes, daggers, and ornaments in elite burials signals more than technological prowess marks the birth of social differentiation based on access to precious materials and skilled craftsmanship. Imagine a burial mound in the Pontic Caspian steppe. A leader laid to rest with copper daggers gleaming faintly in the earth. The objects a testament to both his power and the collective effort of artisans and miners who supplied them. These metals were not merely tools. They were symbols, catalysts for prestige economies that encouraged specialization and connected distant communities through exchange networks that carried obsidian shells and eventually tin and copper over hundreds of km. With the discovery that combining tin with copper produced bronze, a harder, more durable alloy, the pace of innovation accelerated and the social landscape shifted. Communities that controlled metal resources or the knowledge of alloying gained unprecedented influence, reshaping hierarchies and enabling the emergence of warrior elites whose status was inseparable from their weapons. As settlements became hubs of production, storage, and trade, the foundations of complex political authority began to crystallize, laying the groundwork for chieftains, prototes, and eventually the great Bronze Age civilizations. And yet, amidst the gleaming swords and intricate ornaments, one question hangs in the air. How did the seemingly simple act of heating stone and metal in a furnace set in motion a chain of societal transformations that would ripple across Europe and Asia, touching every aspect of life from agriculture to warfare, ritual to economy in ways that no one at the time could have imagined? From the first gleam of copper and bronze, we move to the quiet revolution unfolding in the fields and pastures, where human ingenuity and animal power reshaped the very earth itself, transforming landscapes and lifeways alike. Picture the early Neolithic farmer standing at the edge of a freshly plowed field, the sun low on the horizon, the soil rich and dark beneath his feet. A draft ox or cow harnessed to a primitive plow, muscles straining in unison with human hands as earth is turned for the first time with mechanical assistance. Some researchers believe that this introduction of animal traction, alongside improved wooden and later bronze plows, allowed communities to cultivate larger swaths of land than ever before, increasing food production and supporting growing populations, while others suggest that these innovations spread slowly, adopted first by those who had the wealth or social influence to experiment with heavier, more demanding equipment. Across Europe, evidence of furrow patterns preserved beneath burial mounds and settlement layers hints at a systematic approach to field management, a conscious manipulation of terrain that foreshadows the sophisticated agricultural planning to come. Meanwhile, in distant highland regions, humans were mastering terrace farming, carving stone platforms into steep slopes, constructing drainage channels to prevent soil erosion, and in some cases creating microclimates that extended growing seasons, enabling crops to thrive where they would have otherwise perished. The Andean communities cultivating potatoes and quinoa at altitudes exceeding 4,000 meters may have seemed to define nature itself, yet each terrace, each carefully fitted stone retaining wall, and each irrigation channel represents the patient accumulation of technical knowledge and communal labor. Beyond mere survival, these agricultural transformations allowed for specialization. Some people could focus on crafts, trade, or metallurgy, while others managed livestock or cultivated fields, creating interdependent social networks that reinforced cooperation and hierarchy. The secondary products revolution added another layer of complexity as communities learned to harvest milk, wool, and traction from animals, shifting the relationship between humans and their domesticated companions. and creating a renewable flow of resources that supported both nutrition and trade. Imagine the rhythmic sound of sheep being sheared, the coarse texture of wool sliding through skilled fingers, vessels filled with milk left to ferment into cheese in temperature-controlled chambers, and oxen patiently pulling plows across fertile plains, the combined hum of labor, invention and experimentation echoing across villages and valleys. And yet, even as the Neolithic world became increasingly ordered and productive, one cannot help but wonder, did these advances, so carefully engineered and painstakingly maintained, also sow the seeds of competition, conflict, and social stratification that would shape human communities for millennia to come? As the hum of plows and the bleating of flocks filled the Neolithic landscape, another transformation quietly unfolded, one of mobility, transport, and the bridging of distances that had once seemed insurmountable. Picture the Pontic-Caspian steppes around 3500 BC, where burial mounds of the Kuron culture revealed the earliest wheeled vehicles. 4W wheeled wagons resting alongside the harnessed remains of horses. Their wooden frames meticulously constructed, axles carved with precision, wheels designed to bear heavy loads across uneven terrain. Some scholars argue that these wagons were used primarily for ceremonial purposes to accompany the elite in death, while others suggest that they represent the dawn of practical transportation capable of moving goods, food, and people over previously impossible distances across the vast steppes and into Europe. Depictions of wagons on pottery like the Bronus pot from Poland hint at the standardization of wheel design and the rapid dissemination of this technology through trade networks and cultural exchange. Imagine the creaking of wooden wheels over soft soil, the faint smell of horse sweat mixing with earth and grass, the anticipation of communities realizing that the world was no longer confined to walking distances, that trade and communication could stretch farther, connecting settlements, markets, and distant relatives. With these vehicles came an expansion of agricultural horizons. Heavy plows could be moved from field to field, harvested grain transported efficiently, and seasonal migration or colonization of new lands became a practical possibility. Maritime exploration too took on new dimensions as island settlements in the Mediterranean, such as Kyrgyzstan in Cyprus, demonstrate that entire agricultural packages domesticated animals. Wheat, barley, legumes were transported across open water, creating artificial ecosystems that could sustain permanent communities. These feats of navigation, coupled with wheel transport on land, illustrate a growing understanding of geometry, load distribution, and mechanics, skills honed over generations and transmitted through apprenticeship and shared tradition. Yet for all the promise of connection and expansion, these innovations also carried uncertainty. Every wagon journey risked treacherous terrain. Every crossing of open sea threatened storms and loss. And with expanding populations came competition for fertile land, access to water, and strategic routes. From one mystery to the next, we see how mobility, both terrestrial and maritime, reshaped not only the landscape, but the social fabric, intertwining human ingenuity with risk, ambition, and adaptation. And as the wheels turned and boats cut through waves, one is left to wonder, how did these early experiments in transport set the stage for the sprawling trade networks, cultural exchanges, and technological empires that would define the millennia to come, with transport and mobility transforming the Neolithic world? Another silent revolution was taking place beneath the surface. The rise of metallurgy, the first flickers of fire and molten metal that would ignite a transformation in human society. Imagine furnaces glowing orange in small workshops, smoke curling upward from stone-lined end chambers as artisans carefully controlled airflow with bellows, testing temperatures by touch and intuition, learning the temperaments of copper roes that had been laboriously mined from hillside deposits. Some researchers believe these early metallurgists stumbled upon smelting through trial and error, discovering that native copper could be hammered into simple tools, while others suggest a more deliberate experimentation, inspired by the gleam and malleability of metal fragments found in riverbeds across Anatolia. The Belad site reveals furnace constructions with multiple chambers, air delivery systems, and controlled slag removal, indicating that by 4000 BC, communities had developed specialized knowledge that required apprenticeships, skill, and a deep understanding of heat, chemistry, and material properties. Copper objects, daggers, awls, ornaments began to appear in burials, not simply as tools, but as symbols of status, wealth, and mastery over fire and earth. The transition from simple hammered copper to smelted alloys created a subtle hierarchy as access to ores, fuel, and specialized craftsmen conferred economic and social power on those who controlled them. As the first alloys emerged, the foundations for the Bronze Age were laid. Tin and copper experiments, alloy ratios discovered over generations, slowly giving birth to tools and weapons stronger than stone, able to withstand stress and hold sharper edges. These developments reshaped not only labor but warfare, trade, and social organization, as communities with access to metal could carve out dominance, engage in long distances, exchange and command resources from distant lands. The spread of copper and eventually bronze technologies connected distant regions into early economic networks with obsidian shells and metal flowing along trails that would later become arteries of trade across Europe and the Near East. Yet, even as metal promised power, wealth, and efficiency, it also introduced dependence in mines, furnaces, and the knowledge of skilled hands, and with dependence came vulnerability, disputes, and the subtle emergence of elites capable of wielding influence far beyond their villages. So as sparks flew in darkened workshops and molten metal cooled into gleaming forms, one is left to ponder how did these early me working with fire and earth in quiet anonymity lay the groundwork for civilizations built on bronze conquest and the shimmering allure of crafted wealth. As metal began to reshape the Neolithic world, so too did the subtle yet profound transformations in agriculture and animal management, creating a landscape where human ingenuity intertwined with the natural world in unprecedented ways. Imagine fields stretching across river valleys, their soil dark and rich, carefully tended with bronze plowshares slicing through the earth, while terraces climbed steep hillsides, each stone wall perfectly aligned to prevent erosion and capture precious runoff. Some researchers believe that terrace agriculture first emerged as a desperate solution to high-altitude farming, while others suggest it was the natural consequence of growing populations demanding more arable land. Yet either way, the result was staggering. An intricate patchwork of cultivated land, expertly engineered for productivity and resilience. In parallel, the secondary products revolution quietly unfolded as humans learned to harvest milk, wool, and traction from domesticated animals, not merely their meat. Pottery vessels with perforated bottoms, now appearing across Europe and the Near East, suggest early while lipid residue analysis confirms milk fats had become a dietary staple. providing nutritional security and encouraging larger herds. Sheep were selectively bred for continuous wool growth, requiring annual shearing and creating a rhythm of labor and interdependence between human and animal, while plowing with oxen expanded the boundaries of cultivable land and reduced human toil. The sensory landscape of this period would have been rich and layered. The creak of wooden plows drawn by oxen, the smell of freshly turned soil mingling with smoke from hearths and smelting workshops, the soft rustle of wool in human hands as it was combed, spun, and woven into textiles that carried both practical and symbolic meaning. Communities began to coordinate these complex operations on unprecedented scales, from irrigation networks channeling rivers across fields to the distribution of animal labor for traction, milk and wool demanding organizational skills that foreshadowed later bureaucratic systems. And yet for all this ingenuity, challenges remained. Unpredictable weather, soil exhaustion, and social tensions over resources created a constant undercurrent of uncertainty. As populations grew and communities expanded into previously marginal environments, mountains, islands, high altitude, valleys, the stakes of survival became higher, demanding both cooperation and conflict management. The question lingers, echoing through the terraces, fields, and herds. How did these early agricultural architects balance innovation, labor, and the unpredictability of nature to create societies capable of supporting ever larger populations, laying the groundwork for the complex civilizations that would follow? Next, we move to the subtle yet transformative evolution of trade, craft specialization, and long-distance exchange networks that began to weave distant communities into a shared economic and cultural web. Imagine, if you will, the clatter of stone hammers striking copper, or the hiss of molten metal in clay-lined furnaces, and the steady hands of artisans shaping tools, ornaments, and ceremonial objects, each movement deliberate and precise as knowledge passed from master to apprentice across generations. Some researchers suggest that these early craft specialists, met potters and weavers, were the unseen architects of social complexity, while others argue that their skills only became socially significant when demand and trade networks expanded, creating both prestige and dependency across the Mediterranean. Obsidian from Sardinia and Lippi traveled hundreds of kilometers to sites in Italy, France, and North Africa, evidence of meticulous networks that not only transported raw materials, but also ideas, techniques, and cultural values. Spondylus shells collected from warm coastal waters became objects of status and ritual far inland, showing how communities valued symbolic meaning as much as utility. In parallel, copper and later bronze artifacts began to signal wealth, authority, and identity, with the concentration of these objects in elite burials, suggesting that access to specialized craft production became a form of social leverage. Consider the VA culture, where gold ornaments, carefully hammered and intricately decorated, were not just jewelry. They were markers of power, prestige, and connection, their shiny surfaces reflecting both sunlight and the aspirations of the elite. The technical mastery required to produce these items, precise smelting, alloying, and casting techniques, indicates years of training and a deep understanding of materials, chemistry, and geometry, all cultivated long before formal education existed. Beyond individual communities, these objects facilitated long-distance exchange and created shared aesthetic and symbolic traditions across Europe, from Bulgaria to Ireland, hinting at networks of artisans and merchants who moved across vast distances, carrying not only metal but also knowledge. And yet for all this sophistication, the systems were fragile. Supply chains depended on distant mines. Trade could be disrupted by conflict. And the value of prestige goods hinged entirely on social recognition. As we ponder the glittering artifacts, the clinking of metal, and the meticulously crafted ornaments, one cannot help but wonder, how did these early networks of trade, craft, and social aspiration shape the human experience? And what secrets of cooperation, ambition, and ingenuity lie buried in the soil alongside the artifacts they left behind, waiting to be discovered? From one mystery to the next, we turn our attention to the rise of social hierarchies, political organization, and the earliest forms of governance that emerged as communities became larger, more interconnected, and increasingly dependent on shared resources. Pictures sprawling settlements, tens of thousands of people occupying organized spaces with central plazas echoing the footsteps of traders, farmers, and artisans, while specialized quarters hum with the quiet industry of craft production. Some researchers argue that hierarchies arose naturally from the management demands of agriculture, irrigation, and trade, while others suggest that the accumulation of prestige goods and control over metal resources allowed certain individuals or families to assert authority over others, creating enduring social stratification. Archaeological sites such as Tilani in the Cucutini-Tripalia culture reveal concentric housing arrangements around central spaces, perhaps serving as both practical coordination centers and symbolic focal points of power, hinting at an emerging awareness of urban planning, order, and social cohesion. Meanwhile, administrative artifacts, including clay, tokens, sealings, and prototyping systems, suggest that record-keeping and resource management were critical to maintaining stability across increasingly complex communities. In Mesopotamia, canal networks and water allocation systems required oversight, creating roles that combined technical expertise with authority. While in the European Neolithic, coordinated labor for monumental construction projects or large-scale farming demanded leaders, capable of organizing and motivating large groups of people. Warrior elites began to emerge as bronze weapons became both practical tools and symbols of power, their presence marked by elaborate burials containing swords, daggers, and ornaments that signaled both martial skill and social status. Some scholars interpret these burials as evidence of hereditary chieftainships, others as temporary accumulation of prestige by exceptional individuals. But the pattern is clear. Authority was increasingly tied to control over resources, technology, and symbolic objects. At the same time, communal rituals and shared cultural practices, festivals, feasts, and ceremonial gatherings helped to reinforce cohesion, transmit social norms, and legitimize emerging hierarchies. Yet for all this organization, society remained fragile, vulnerable to environmental pressures, internal conflict, and the unpredictability of human ambition. As we stand at the threshold of these early political systems, imagining the delicate balance between cooperation, authority, and competition, we are left with a lingering question. How did these first experiments in governance shape human society? And what echoes of their power structures can we trace in the civilizations that would rise millennia later, leaving us to wonder what secrets of leadership and social organization remain hidden beneath the earth? As we drift further into the unfolding story of the Neolithic, we arrive at the dramatic transformation of warfare, defense, and the very concept of territory itself. A shadowed chapter that reveals how human ambition and the competition for resources began to shape landscapes and lives alike. Imagine vast fields once tilled in peaceful routine, now bordered by ditches, embankments, and wooden palisades. The echoes of hammers and axes resonating as communities built defenses to protect both their sustenance and their social order. Some researchers suggest that the introduction of bronze weaponry created a leap in military potential, elevating certain groups to dominance, while others adapted to survival strategies that included fortified settlements and strategic alliances. Sites like Maiden Castle in England, with its layered earthworks, complex entrance systems, and areas dedicated to storing weapons and provisions, speak to not only practical defense, but also to a psychological assertion of power, visual and functional warning to any would-be intruder. At the same time, the accumulation of bronze daggers, swords, and spearheads in elite burials indicates that the art of war was becoming intertwined with social status and political authority, turning martial skill into a key determinant of influence. Some scholars propose that early conflicts were often driven by competition over land, water, and trade routes, while others argue that ritualized displays of power and prestige may have escalated into outright warfare, leaving traces in both the archaeological record and the mythology that survives in fragments of oral tradition. The physical remnants of these conflicts, the worn tips of arrowheads, the scars on palisade timbers, the carefully positioned defensive mounds over a tactile connection to the fears, strategies, and ambitions of communities that were only beginning to understand the implications of concentrated power and technological advantage. Beyond the fortifications and weapons, there is evidence of social adaptation. Specialized warrior classes, training in the use of weapons, and systems of logistics to sustain defensive efforts over extended periods. These changes did not merely protect communities. They reshaped their relationships with neighbors, their agricultural strategies, and even their settlement patterns. As villages consolidated around defensible positions and fertile lands were claimed, defended, and passed down through generations. As we consider these early episodes of organized defense and martial development, one cannot help but feel the tension of a world in transition. A world where the lines between survival, status, and ambition blurred, and where the seeds of civilization's greatest conflicts were quietly being sown. What forces drove these communities to build such formidable defenses? And how did the shadow of war influence the very fabric of early human society, leaving behind mysteries that still whisper through the earth? Next, we move to the transformation of belief systems and ritual practice, an often overlooked but profoundly telling aspect of Neolithic life, where the intangible, the unseen forces of spirit, ancestor, and cosmos entwined with the tangible, shaping daily existence and societal structure. Picture communities gathered in carefully chosen landscapes where the placement of monuments, tombs, and ceremonial spaces aligns not only with practical needs, but with an understanding of the skies, the seasons, and the rhythms of life and death. Some researchers believe that the shift from collective megalithic tombs to individualized barrow and chamber burials reflects a deeper conceptual change, a move toward recognizing personal achievement, lineage, and social differentiation rather than solely communal identity. Evidence from sites like Bushbarrow in England, where a single interment was accompanied by a gold-decorated bronze dagger, stone mace head, and finely crafted ornaments, suggests that ritual and display were inseparable, communicating messages about status, skill, and cosmic order. Other scholars suggest that the arrangement of settlements and ceremonial structures often aligned with solar or lunar cycles, may indicate that early communities possessed surprisingly sophisticated astronomical knowledge embedded within their spiritual practices. The Nebra sky disk from Germany, dating later, but echoing these traditions, hints at a long continuum of celestial observation tied directly to ritual agriculture and governance, revealing an early understanding of the cosmos as a framework for human action. Pottery, rock art, and decorative motifs, often featuring spirals, hand stencils, and animal forms, serve as symbolic lexicons, translating shared beliefs across communities separated by vast distances. These artistic conventions may have communicated ideas about regeneration, cycles of life and death, or sacred landscapes, allowing human populations to maintain cultural cohesion, even amid migration, trade, and social change. Some argue that the standardization of these symbols across regions points to networks of knowledge transmission, possibly involving itinerant craftspeople, priestly specialists, or ritual intermediaries whose roles were as essential to social stability as farming or tool-making. Even the mundane, the careful preparation of burial goods, the construction of terraces, or the engineering of canals was imbued with ritual significance. A daily acknowledgement that human activity and the natural world were intertwined in a delicate balance. As we consider these layered practices, we begin to see the Neolithic not merely as a period of technological advancement, but as an era in which belief, labor, and community were fused into a complex tapestry guiding survival, hierarchy, and identity. And yet, behind these meticulously arranged burials and monumental landscapes, one must ask how much of this knowledge was lost to time, and what mysteries of human thought and spirituality remain hidden beneath the earth, waiting silently for discovery. Finally, we arrive at the culmination of the Neolithic journey, the point where centuries of human ingenuity, experimentation, and adaptation coals into the foundations of civilization as we recognize it today. And yet the story remains shrouded in mystery, because what we see on the surface is only a shadow of the lives, struggles, and ambitions of those early communities. Imagine standing at the edge of a sprawling Neolithic settlement, the scent of smoke from hearths mingling with the earthy aroma of freshly tilled fields, the hum of human activity stretching across clusters of roundhouses, terraces and irrigation channels, all meticulously engineered to harness the land's potential. Here, every element from the polished stone axes to the finely crafted ceramics, from the first wheeled vehicles to the intricate copper and early bronze tools, represents not just survival, but an emerging understanding of scale, resource management, and societal complexity. Some researchers propose that these settlements were more than mere habitations. They were living laboratories where trial and error in agriculture, metallurgy, and animal husbandry created lessons passed down through generations. Lessons that would eventually underpin cities, states, and empires. Others suggest that the immense labor invested in monumental constructions such as burial mounds, terraces, and early fortifications reflects not only practical needs but a communal vision, a collective consciousness reaching toward permanence, identity, and legacy. Trade networks moving obsidian, gold, shells, and copper across vast distances hint at early forms of diplomacy, economic interdependence, and social stratification, revealing that these seemingly remote communities were interconnected in ways that challenge modern assumptions about prehistoric isolation. The domestication of plants and animals, the systematic exploitation of secondary products, and the technological leaps in irrigation Metallurgy and transport transformed landscapes, ecosystems, and human relationships, creating artificial worlds shaped by human hands and imagination. And yet, despite the evidence etched in soil, stone, and metal, much remains uncertain. How did these communities perceive their place in the cosmos? How did their spiritual beliefs shape daily decisions? And what knowledge vanished as settlements were abandoned, forests snorts reclaimed fields, and rivers shifted courses? As we drift back from this ancient world, it is striking to realize that the Neolithic revolution was not a single event, but a profound, multifaceted transformation, a slow, clear-throat-burning revolution of mind, body, and spirit that laid the groundwork for everything that followed. So, as you close your eyes and let the stories of these first farmers, builders, and dreamers wash over you, consider this. Every plough mark, every stone circle, every bronze dagger is a whisper from the past, a fragment of a civilization that once held the keys to shaping human destiny, and yet even now continues to guard its deepest secrets, leaving us to wonder what other mysteries lie just beneath the surface, waiting for the curious and patient to uncover. Our journey through the mud brick villages and first great temples of the Neolithic age ends here. We learned about the fertility of the soil and the great social transformation brought about by settled life, and how the agricultural revolution not only fed us but also shaped our beliefs and built our cities. After learning about the details of this ancient way of life, don't forget to subscribe. Take care of yourselves until our next journey.